The morning sun filled the grand halls of the Valari Imperial Palace with golden light. The walls were made of white stone that sparkled like stars. Tall windows reached up toward the ceiling, and beautiful paintings of ancient Valari rulers watched over everyone who walked below. Princess Yera moved through the hallway like she owned every stone beneath her feet, and in truth, she did. She was the only daughter of Empress Naya, ruler of the mighty Valari Empire. The Valari were tall and graceful, with silver skin that glowed softly in the light. Their eyes were large and violet, and they considered themselves the most beautiful and advanced species in the galaxy. Yera had her mother's beauty, but not her wisdom. At barely 60 years old, still young for a Valari, she carried herself with the pride of someone who had never known hardship. 3 attendants followed behind her, their heads bowed in respect. "The trade delegation from the Norux system arrives tomorrow," one attendant said softly. "Your mother wishes you to attend the welcome ceremony." Yera waved her hand dismissively. "How boring. All they do is talk about shipping routes and mineral rights. Wake me when something interesting happens." The attendants exchanged nervous looks but said nothing. No one corrected the princess. As they turned a corner into a smaller hallway, Yera suddenly stopped. Her violet eyes narrowed with curiosity and then filled with amusement. Standing guard beside a minor doorway was a human. He was short compared to the Valari. All humans were. His skin was a warm brown color and his dark hair was cut very short in military style. He wore a simple palace guard uniform, but it looked almost silly on his small frame. His eyes stared straight ahead, and he stood perfectly still like a statue. Yera had seen humans before, of course. They worked throughout the galaxy as traders, mechanics, and servants. They were useful enough for simple tasks, but the idea of one guarding her palace was almost funny. "Well, well," Yera said, walking toward him slowly. "What do we have here?" The human did not move. His eyes did not shift toward her. His name tag read, Kang Do-Yun. "Look at this, everyone," Yera called to her attendants with a laugh. "The palace has hired a human guard. Tell me, little creature, what exactly are you guarding? A broom closet?" Still, Do-Yun did not respond. His face showed nothing. No anger, no shame, no emotion at all. This annoyed Yera. She was used to reactions. She was used to fear and respect and desperate attempts to please her. This human gave her nothing. "I asked you a question," she said, her voice harder now. "Do humans not have manners? Or are your ears as small as the rest of you?" Her attendants laughed nervously. They did not want to laugh at the princess's jokes, but they also did not dare stay silent. Do-Yun finally spoke. His voice was quiet and calm. "I guard wherever I am assigned, Your Highness." "Wherever you are assigned," Yera repeated mockingly. "How very obedient, like a trained pet." She circled him slowly, looking at him like he was an insect she had found on her dinner plate. "Tell me, human, do you know why your kind is scattered across the galaxy doing small jobs for greater species?" Do-Yun said nothing. "Because that is all you are good for," Yera continued. "Humans are the galaxy's errand runners. You carry bags, you clean floors, you fix machines that better species design. Your only value is your willingness to do whatever you are told." The oldest attendant, an elderly Valari woman named Sarah, shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes moved to the floor and her hands twisted together with worry. But she stayed silent. Yera stopped in front of Do-Yun and looked up at his face. Even though she was taller than him, she somehow felt like he was looking down at her. This made her angry. "When I pass by," she said coldly, "you will bow. Not the small bow you give to officers, a full bow. Your head should nearly touch the floor. Do you understand?" For the first time, Do-Yun's eyes moved. They met Yera's gaze for just a moment. In that brief second, Yera saw something strange. Not anger, not fear, but something deeper, something sad and tired and ancient. Then it was gone. Do-yun bowed deeply, his head dropping low. "Yes, Your Highness," he said quietly. Yira smiled with satisfaction. "Good. At least you can learn." She turned and walked away, her attendants hurrying to follow. Their footsteps echoed through the hallway until they faded into silence. Do-yun straightened slowly. His face was still calm, but for a moment, his hand moved to touch something beneath his uniform, something hidden over his heart. From the shadows of a nearby doorway, a figure stepped forward. He was High Commander Torek, head of the Imperial Guard. He was old for a Valari warrior, his silver skin marked with the pale lines of many scars. His violet eyes watched the direction the princess had gone. And his expression was dark with something between anger and sorrow. "You should have said something," Torek said quietly. Do-yun shook his head. "It would serve no purpose. She does not know who you are. She does not know what you did. And that is how it should be." Do-yun returned his eyes to the hallway ahead. "I did not come here for recognition, Commander. I came to keep a promise." Torek stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. 30 years, Do-yun. 30 years you have served in the shadows. You watched her grow from an infant to a woman. You protected her from threats she never knew existed. And this is how she treats you? "She is young," Do-yun said simply. "She believes what she has been taught. I do not blame her for the lies others told." Torek's hands formed fists at his sides. "The Council erased your sacrifice. They erased the sacrifice of 50,000 humans. They let our people believe we saved ourselves, and now the princess mocks you in your own hallway." Do-yun finally turned to look at the old commander. A small, sad smile crossed his face. "My soldiers did not die for gratitude, Torek. They died because it was right, because innocent people needed help, and we could give it." He looked back toward the hallway. "The princess will learn the truth someday, or she will not. Either way, I will keep my promise." Torek stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "You humans," he muttered. "I have lived for 300 years, and I still do not understand you." Do-yun almost laughed. "Good. Keep it that way." Torek turned to leave, but stopped at the corner. He looked back one more time at the small human standing guard beside a forgotten door. "She has no idea who stands before her," Torek whispered to himself. "No idea at all." Then he walked away, leaving Do-yun alone with his memories and his silent promise. The sun continued to move across the sky. Servants passed by without looking at him. Guards changed shifts at other posts, and Kang Do-yun stood motionless through it all, watching over a palace that had forgotten his name but not forgotten to use his service. In his chest, beneath his uniform, a small piece of metal hung on an old chain. It was a medal from Earth, the highest honor a human soldier could receive. He had not shown it to anyone in 30 years. He did not need them to remember. He only needed to keep his promise. The royal dining hall was filled with soft music and quiet conversation. Crystal lights floated near the ceiling, casting gentle shadows across the long table. 20 nobles sat in their places, eating food that most common people would never taste in their entire lives. At the head of the table sat Empress Naya. She was beautiful in the way that ancient statues are beautiful, timeless and calm and impossible to look away from. Her silver skin glowed softly, and her violet eyes held the weight of many difficult years. She had ruled the Valari Empire for over a century, guiding her people through peace and prosperity. But tonight, something heavy sat behind her eyes, something tired. Princess Yira sat at her mother's right hand, talking loudly to the nobles around her. She was telling them a story, and they were all listening with polite smiles. "So there I was, walking through the east corridor," Yira said, "and I found a human standing guard. A human! Can you imagine? Guarding our palace like he belonged there." Some nobles chuckled softly. Others glanced at the Empress, but her face showed nothing. "I asked him what he was doing," Yira continued, "and he just stood there like a frightened animal. These humans, honestly, they are so simple. I had to explain to him how to properly bow when royalty passes." More laughter from the younger nobles. The older ones stayed quiet. "I put him in his place," Yira finished proudly. "Someone had to teach him proper respect." The table fell into an uncomfortable silence. Yira did not notice. She picked up her glass and drank deeply, pleased with herself. Then Empress Naya spoke. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Which human guard?" Yira looked at her mother with surprise. "What? You said you spoke to a human guard? Which one?" Yira shrugged. "I do not know. Some small, quiet man. His name was—" She thought for a moment. "Kang something. Kang Do-yun, I think." The glass in Empress Naya's hand cracked. Wine spilled across her silver fingers like blood. The entire table froze. Yira stared at her mother with wide eyes. "Mother? Are you hurt?" Naya did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on something far away, something no one else could see. Her hands were trembling, something Yira had never witnessed before. The Empress did not tremble. The Empress did not show fear. The Empress was stone, but now that stone was cracking. High Commander Torek, who sat at the far end of the table, slowly lowered his head. His old eyes closed with pain. "Mother?" Yira said again, her voice smaller now. "It was just a human. I do not understand why—" "Enough." Naya's voice was barely a whisper, but it silenced the room completely. She stood slowly, wine still dripping from her hand. Her violet eyes finally focused on her daughter, and Yira felt something she had never felt before under her mother's gaze. She felt small. "We will speak later," Naya said. Then she turned and walked out of the dining hall without another word. The doors closed behind her with a heavy sound. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The floating lights continued their gentle dance, but all the warmth had left the room. An older noble cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should continue the meal?" But no one was hungry anymore. Yira sat frozen in her chair. Confusion and anger fought for control of her face. What had she done wrong? It was just a human, just a small, unimportant human guard. Why would her mother react like this? She stood up sharply. "I need air," she announced to no one in particular. Then she walked quickly out of the hall through a different door. The corridors were quiet at this hour. Most servants were busy with dinner duties, and the guards stood at their posts like silent statues. Yira walked without direction, her mind spinning with questions. Her mother had never looked at her like that before. Never. Even when Yira made mistakes or said foolish things, Naya always responded with patience and gentle correction. But tonight there was something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Fear of what? Of a human? It made no sense. Yira found herself near the central tower of the palace. She was about to turn back when she heard footsteps ahead. Quiet footsteps, moving quickly. She pressed herself against the wall and looked around the corner. It was her mother. Empress Naya walked alone, without guards or servants. Her silver gown flowed behind her as she moved toward a door that Yira had seen many times but never entered. It was made of black metal and covered with ancient symbols. Above it, carved in the old Valari language, were the words, "Hall of Remembrance." Yira knew this place. Everyone knew this place. It was forbidden to all except the Empress herself. It held the most secret histories of the Valari Empire, records that were too dangerous or too shameful for common knowledge. Yira had asked about it once when she was a child. Her mother had smiled and said, "Someday, when you are empress, you will enter, but not before." Now Yira watched as her mother placed her hand on the door. It glowed briefly, recognizing her touch, and then swung open silently. Naya stepped inside, and the door began to close. Without thinking, Yira ran forward. She reached the door just before it sealed completely. She slipped through the narrow gap and pressed herself into the shadows inside. The Hall of Remembrance was dark. The only light came from floating crystals that drifted slowly through the air. The walls were lined with strange devices, machines that Yira did not recognize. In the center of the room stood a single pedestal with a glowing sphere resting on top. Empress Naya walked to the pedestal and placed both hands on the sphere. She spoke a word in the old language, and suddenly the room came alive. Holographic images exploded outward from the sphere. They filled the entire hall with light and color and sound. Yira had to cover her mouth to stop herself from gasping. She was looking at a war. Valari ships burned in the darkness of space. Planets were covered in fire. Soldiers screamed as they fell to enemies that Yira had never seen before. Horrible creatures with black shells and too many legs and mouths full of sharp teeth. "The Drekari," Naya whispered, and her voice was filled with old pain. "How close we came to extinction." Yira watched in horror as the images showed her people dying by the thousands. Cities crumbled, families ran through burning streets. Children cried for parents who would never come. This was her empire? This was her proud, powerful empire? Then the images changed. New ships appeared, small and ugly compared to Valari vessels. They were gray and simple and looked like they were held together with hope and nothing else. Human ships. Yira's eyes widened as she watched the human fleet charge directly into the Drekari forces. They were outnumbered 10-1. It was suicide. It was madness. But they did not stop. She watched human soldiers land on burning Valari worlds. She watched them form lines in front of civilian shelters. She watched them fight and fall and die, not for their own people, but for strangers with silver skin and violet eyes. A recording showed a young human officer carrying 3 Valari children through a ruined city. Fire burned all around him. His face was covered in blood and dirt. But he did not stop moving until those children were safe. Yira felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not understand. She did not understand any of this. Why had no one told her? Why did she not know? Her mother stood before the images, weeping silently. The most powerful woman in the empire stood crying over memories of humans who had given everything for people who would later forget them. And somewhere in the palace, a quiet human guard stood at his post, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, holding on to a promise that he had kept for 30 years. Yira's world was starting to crack. But she did not yet know how deep the cracks would go. Yira could not move. She stood in the shadows of the Hall of Remembrance and watched images of death and sacrifice fill the air around her. Her mother stood at the center of it all, surrounded by ghosts of a war that Yira had never been taught about. The holographic recordings continued to play. Yira saw Valari battlecruisers breaking apart in space. She saw escape pods burning as they tried to reach safety. She saw her people, proud, powerful, superior Valari, running and screaming and begging for help. And then she saw who answered. The human ships were not beautiful. They were not elegant or impressive. They looked like metal boxes held together with tape and prayer. But they came. When every other species in the galaxy turned away, when every ally found excuses and every friend went silent, the humans came. A recording showed a human commander speaking to his fleet. He was young, so young that Yira could not believe he was leading anyone. His name appeared beneath his image. Captain Kang Do-yun, 3rd Human Fleet. Yira's breath stopped in her chest. It was him, the guard she had mocked, the man she had forced to bow. He looked different in the recording, younger, stronger, with fire in his eyes instead of quiet patience, but it was definitely him. "The Valari have called for help," the young Do-yun said to his soldiers. "They are not our people. They are not our allies. Most of them have never even spoken to a human. But they are dying, and we can save them." He paused, and his eyes moved across the faces of his crew. "Command has told me that this is likely a one-way mission. The Drakari are too many, and we are too few. I will not lie to you. Many of us will not come home." No one spoke. No one moved. "But I believe," Do-yun continued, "that what we are matters more than how long we are. I believe that a single act of courage can echo through history forever. And I believe that if we do not help people who need us, then we do not deserve to call ourselves human." The recording showed his soldiers cheering, not because they wanted to die, but because they believed in something greater than themselves. Yira felt tears running down her face. She did not try to stop them. The next recording showed the battle. Human ships crashed into Drakari formations with no regard for their own safety. They created openings for Valari civilians to escape. They sacrificed cruisers to save transport ships full of children. Then the images moved to the ground, to the Valari homeworld itself. The palace was burning. Yira recognized the halls she had walked through just hours ago. But in the recording, those halls were filled with smoke and fire and the screams of the dying. Drakari soldiers poured through broken walls, killing everyone they found, and standing in their way was a small group of human soldiers. 200 humans against thousands of Drakari. They should have run. They should have retreated. Any reasonable commander would have ordered a withdrawal, but Captain Kang Do-yun did not run. "Hold the line!" His voice shouted through the chaos. "The royal family is still evacuating. Hold the line!" Yira watched humans die one by one. They did not die running. They did not die begging. They died standing, fighting, buying time with their own blood. She watched a young human woman, barely more than a girl, take a Drakari blade meant for a Valari child. The woman fell, but the child lived. She watched a human medic drag 3 wounded Valari soldiers to safety while his own arm hung broken and useless at his side. She watched Captain Do-yun himself stand alone in a corridor as his last soldiers fell around him. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His weapon was nearly empty, but he did not move. "You do not pass," he said to the approaching Drakari. His voice was calm. "Not while I breathe." The recording flickered then. Parts were damaged or missing, but Yira saw enough. She saw Do-yun fight until he could not stand. She saw him crawl toward the evacuation point, still trying to protect people who would later forget his name. Then a new recording began. It showed a small room somewhere underground. Emergency lights flickered red. A young Valari woman sat in the corner holding something in her arms. She was wounded and crying and clearly terrified. Yira recognized her immediately. It was her mother, young and scared and alone. And in her arms was a baby, a tiny Valari infant wrapped in a torn piece of cloth. Yira touched her own chest. That baby was her. The door burst open and Yira felt her heart stop. But it was not a Drakari who entered. It was a human soldier, covered in blood and barely able to walk. "Do-yun!" Young Naya screamed and tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. Do-yun raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Your Highness," he said, his voice rough with pain, "I am Captain Kang Do-yun. I promised I would protect your family." He stepped closer and offered his hand. "The evacuation shuttle is waiting. I will take you there." "Why?" young Naya whispered. Why would you die for us? We are not your people." Do-yun smiled. It was the saddest smile Yera had ever seen. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That is all the reason I need." He picked up the infant Yera in his arms, so gently, so carefully, like she was made of glass. Then he helped Naya to her feet and guided them through the burning palace. The recording showed them running through corridors filled with bodies. Drakari screamed somewhere behind them. Do-yun never stopped moving. When enemies appeared, he put himself between them and the royal family. When Naya fell, he carried her. Finally, they reached the shuttle. Other survivors were already inside, mostly children and wounded. Do-yun placed the infant Yera into her mother's arms and stepped back. "Go," he said. "I will hold them here." "You will die," Naya said, her voice breaking. "Perhaps." Do-yun smiled again. "But your daughter will live. That is worth more than my life." The shuttle doors closed. Through the window, Yera could see Do-yun turning to face the approaching enemy. He raised his weapon one more time. The recording ended. Yera fell to her knees. She could not breathe. She could not think. Everything she had ever believed about humans, about her own history, was a lie. Her mother's voice spoke softly in the darkness. Naya had known her daughter was there. Perhaps she had always known. 49,999 humans died that day, Naya said. They came to save strangers, and we let our council erase them from history because we were too proud to admit we needed help. Yera looked up at her mother. "He survived?" "Do-yun survived." Naya nodded slowly. "He was the only one. When we found him after the battle, he was more dead than alive, but he refused to leave. He said he had made a promise to watch over you." 30 years, Yera whispered. "He has been here for 30 years? Guarding you in silence, asking for nothing, expecting nothing." Naya's violet eyes were full of tears. "And today, my daughter, you mocked him in front of servants and called him the galaxy's errand runner." Yera's shame was so heavy that she thought it might crush her into dust. "What have I done?" she whispered. Her mother did not answer. Some questions had no answers. Some mistakes could not be undone with words, but perhaps, they could be undone with actions. Yera stood slowly. Her legs were weak, but her heart was burning with new purpose. She had to find him. She had to understand, and she had to make this right. Yera did not sleep that night. She could not close her eyes without seeing the images from the Hall of Remembrance, human soldiers dying, her mother crying, a young captain carrying an infant through fire and blood. That infant was her. When morning came, Yera went looking for answers. She walked through the palace corridors with a new purpose, ignoring the servants who bowed as she passed. She was not interested in their respect anymore. She was interested in truth. She found High Commander Torek in the training yard, watching young Valari soldiers practice their combat skills. He was old and scarred, but his violet eyes were still sharp. They saw everything, including her approach. "Princess," he said without turning around, "you look like you have not slept." "I need to talk to you," Yera said. "Alone." Torek waved away the nearby guards. They hesitated. Leaving the princess without protection felt wrong, but Torek's authority was absolute. They retreated to the far end of the yard. Yera stepped closer to the old commander. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Why did no one tell me? About the war, about the humans, about him?" Torek finally turned to face her. His expression was tired, but not surprised. "Your mother told you to enter the hall, did she?" "No." "I followed her." Yera felt no shame admitting it. "I saw the recordings. All of them." Torek was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and began to walk toward a stone bench at the edge of the yard. Yera followed. They sat together in the morning sunlight. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Torek began. 30 years ago, The Drakari came. They were a swarm, endless, hungry, unstoppable. They had destroyed 12 civilizations before they reached us. We thought we were powerful. We thought our fleet was unmatched. We were wrong. He stared at his scarred hands. In 3 months, they burned half our empire. Our allies abandoned us. The Norok said we were too far away. The Keldari said they could not risk their own people. Everyone had an excuse. Everyone had a reason to look away while we died. But the humans came, Yira said quietly. The humans came. Torek's voice was thick with emotion. They sent their entire third fleet, 50,000 soldiers and crew. Their commander was young, barely 30 years old by human counting. His name was Kang Do-yun. Yira's heart ached at the name. They knew it was a death mission, Torek continued. Everyone knew. Human ships were weaker than ours. Their weapons were smaller. But they came anyway because someone had sent a distress call, and they could not ignore people in pain. What happened next? They bought us time. 3 human cruisers crashed directly into the Drakari command ship, intentional suicide runs, just to create an opening for our evacuation transports. Their ground forces landed on our homeworld and held the palace for 3 days while we moved civilians to safety. Torek closed his eyes. His voice became barely a whisper. I was there, Princess. I fought beside them. I watched boys and girls younger than you stand against monsters and refuse to run. I watched a human medic carry 4 Valari children on his back through enemy fire. He took 6 shots before he fell, and even then, he crawled the last 20 meters to put those children behind our lines. Tears fell from the old commander's eyes. He did not wipe them away. When the battle ended, we counted the dead. 49,999 humans. Every single one of them died for people they had never met. People who had never done anything for them. People who thought humans were weak and unimportant. Yira felt sick. She felt like the ground beneath her was breaking apart. Of Do-yun's personal unit, 200 soldiers who held the palace gates, 199 died. Torek looked at her. Only Do-yun survived. When we found him, he was lying in a pile of Drakari bodies. He had killed them with his hands after his weapon ran empty. He should have died a dozen times. But he did not. Why did he stay here after? Yira asked. Why did he not go home? Torek laughed bitterly. Because he made a promise to your mother. He promised he would watch over her family. He promised he would keep you safe. And Kang Do-yun does not break promises. Yira covered her face with her hands. But why does no one know? Why is this not in any history book? Why did I grow up believing humans were nothing? Torek's expression became hard, cold. Because the council decided that our pride was more important than truth. They said the Valari people could not accept that we were saved by lesser beings. They said it would weaken our empire if other species learned how close we came to destruction. So they erased the humans from history. They buried the records. They made it illegal to speak of what really happened. And Do-yun just accepted this? He did not care about glory, Princess. He did not care if anyone remembered his name. He cared about keeping his promise. So he stayed here, guarding your family from shadows, watching you grow from a baby to a woman. 30 years of silence, 30 years of being treated like a servant. Torek turned to face Yira directly. His violet eyes burned with intensity. And yesterday, you mocked him. You called him an errand runner. You made him bow to you like he was nothing. His voice was not angry. It was sad. That man saved your life before you could speak your first word. He has protected you every day since. And he never once asked for thanks. Yira felt like she had been stabbed through the heart. The shame was unbearable. The guilt was crushing. I have to apologize, she said. I have to tell him that I know, that I understand. Will that change anything? Torek asked. Will words undo 30 years of silence? Will Sorry bring back 49,000 dead soldiers? Yira had no answer. I am not saying you should not apologize, Torek continued more gently. I am saying that words are easy, actions are hard. If you truly want to honor what Du Yun did, what all those humans did, you must become someone worthy of their sacrifice. He stood and looked down at her. You have spent your life believing humans are beneath you. Now you know the truth. The question is, what will you do with it? Yira stood slowly. Her legs felt weak, but her mind was clearer than it had ever been. Where is he now? She asked. Same place he always is, guarding a doorway that nobody important passes through, watching over a palace that forgot his name. Torek paused. But be careful, princess. Du Yun does not want your pity. He does not want your tears. If you go to him with nothing but guilt, you will only insult him further. Yira nodded. She understood. She could not give him back what he had lost. She could not return the years he had spent in shadow, or the soldiers who had died beside him, or the recognition he had been denied. But she could give him something else. She could give him her change. She could give him her growth. She could become a leader worthy of the sacrifice he had made. That would be her apology, not in words, but in who she chose to become. Yira walked toward the palace interior. Her steps were faster now, more certain. She was going to find Do Yun, and she was going to begin her transformation. Yira searched the palace for hours. She checked every corridor, every doorway, every forgotten corner where a guard might stand. But Do Yun was not at his usual post. He was not anywhere she looked. Finally, she found an old servant who told her that Do Yun's shift had ended. He had returned to his quarters in the lower levels of the palace, the area where maintenance workers and cleaning staff lived. Yira had never been to the lower levels. She did not even know they existed until today. As she walked down the narrow stairs, the walls changed from polished white stone to plain gray metal. The floating lights were replaced by simple electric bulbs. The smell of flowers and perfume gave way to the smell of oil and sweat. This was where the forgotten people lived. Do Yun's quarters were at the end of a long hallway. His door was smaller than the closets in Yira's bedroom. She stood before it for a long moment, her hand raised but unable to knock. What would she say? How could she possibly begin? Before she could decide, the door opened. Do Yun stood there in simple civilian clothes, a plain shirt and trousers that made him look even more ordinary than his guard uniform. His eyes showed no surprise at seeing her. They showed very little at all. Princess, he said calmly, you should not be here. May I come in? Do Yun studied her face for a moment. Then he stepped aside. The room was tiny. Yira could have crossed it in 4 steps. There was a small bed, a wooden chair, a metal desk with nothing on it. No decorations, no personal items. Nothing that showed a life had been lived here for 30 years. Except one thing. On the wall above the bed, held in place by a single pin, was a piece of paper. It was old and faded, the edges torn and yellow with age. Yira stepped closer to look at it. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, made with colored sticks on rough paper. It showed a tall figure with silver skin holding hands with a small figure in gray. The small figure had a big smile on its face. Above them, in the shaky letters of a young child, were the words, "Thank you for saving me." Yira's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the drawing style. She recognized the way the letters were shaped. She had drawn hundreds of pictures just like this when she was very young. "I made this," she whispered. Do Yun stood by the door, his arms folded. "You were 4 years old. You gave it to me after I caught you when you fell from a garden wall. You did not know who I was. You just knew that I had helped you." Yira touched the paper gently. The edges crumbled slightly under her fingers. "I do not remember," she said, her voice breaking. I do not remember any of it. Not the fall. Not you catching me. Not giving you this drawing. You were a child. Children forget. Yira turned to face him. Tears were streaming down her face now, and she did not try to hide them. I know everything, she said. I went to the Hall of Remembrance. I saw the recordings. I saw what you did. What all of you did. Do-Yun's expression did not change. Then you know more than most. Why did you never tell anyone? Yira's voice rose with emotion. Why did you let them erase you? Why did you spend 30 years being treated like nothing when you are a hero? Hero. Do-Yun said the word like it tasted strange in his mouth. I do not like that word. But you are. You saved my mother. You saved me. You lost everything. I lost nothing. His voice was suddenly sharp, and Yira fell silent. Do-Yun closed his eyes and took a slow breath. When he opened them again, the sharpness was gone. I am sorry, he said. That was too harsh. No, I am the one who should apologize. The things I said to you? Yira's voice cracked. I called you an errand runner. I made you bow. I treated you like dirt beneath my shoes. You believed what you were taught. That does not make it right. No, Do-Yun agreed, but it makes it understandable. You did not know the truth. How could I be angry at you for not knowing something that was hidden from you? He walked past her and sat on the edge of his small bed. For a moment he looked very old, very tired. The soldiers who died with me, they were my family. We trained together. We laughed together. We made promises to each other that we would survive and go home. His voice was soft now, full of old pain. None of them kept that promise. I am the only one left. Yira sat in the wooden chair across from him. How do you live with that? By keeping a different promise. Do-Yun looked at her. I told your mother that I would watch over her family. I told her that her daughter would grow up safe. Every morning when I wake up, I remember that promise. And every night when I go to sleep, I know that I kept it for another day. But is that enough? To live for a promise? Do-Yun smiled slightly. It was the first time Yira had seen him smile. What else is there to live for, princess? Glory fades. Power corrupts. Wealth means nothing when you are alone. But a promise is eternal. It connects you to the people you made it to and the people you made it for. It gives your life meaning even when everything else is gone. Yira wiped her eyes. I want to understand. I want to be worthy of what you sacrificed. Then do not waste your guilt on me. Do-Yun leaned forward. Your shame is enough. I felt it when you walked in. I see it in your tears. You understand now that you were wrong. That is all I ever needed. What do you want from me? I want you to become a good leader. I want you to remember that every person, human, Valari, or anything else, has value. I want you to treat the weakest member of your empire with the same respect you would give to the strongest. He paused. If you do that, then my 30 years of silence will have meaning. If you do that, then my soldiers did not die for nothing. Before Yira could respond, a sound cut through the air. It was loud and sharp and terrifying, the palace emergency alarm. Both of them jumped to their feet. Do-Yun's entire posture changed in an instant. The tired old man was gone. In his place stood a soldier. What is that? Yira asked, her heart racing. Do-Yun was already moving toward the door. That is the invasion alarm. I have not heard it in 30 years. He opened the door and grabbed a passing servant by the arm. What is happening? The servant's face was pale with fear. The Drakari, sir! They have been spotted at the edge of our system. They are coming back. Yira felt the blood drain from her face. The monsters from the recordings. The swarm that had nearly destroyed her people. They were returning. Do-Yun released the servant and looked at Yira. His eyes were calm and steady. "It seems," he said quietly, "that my promise is not finished yet." He began walking toward the palace command center, his steps quick and sure. Yira followed without hesitation. She was not going to let him face this alone. Not again. Never again. The throne room was in chaos. Generals shouted at each other across the long table. Advisors whispered urgently into communication devices. Servants ran back and forth carrying reports that nobody had time to read. The great crystal lights above flickered as if they could feel the fear in the room. Empress Naya sat on her throne, her face carved from stone. She listened to the reports without moving, without reacting. But Yira could see her mother's hands gripping the arms of the throne so tightly that her silver knuckles were white. "The Drakari fleet is larger than anything we have on record," a general was saying. "Our estimates suggest over 300 capital ships. Our entire fleet numbers 120. "Then we must call for help," another general shouted. "Contact the Noruks, the Keldari, anyone." "We already have. They are not responding, just like last time." "Then we fight alone. We will be destroyed within hours." The shouting continued. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a fear. No one had a solution. Yira stood near the back of the room with Do Yun. He had not tried to speak. He had not pushed forward to offer advice. He simply watched with the calm patience of a man who had seen this kind of panic before. "They are afraid," Yira whispered to him. "They should be," Do Yun replied. "The Drakari are not enemies you can negotiate with. They do not want territory or resources. They want to consume. That is all they know how to do. How did you defeat them last time? We did not defeat them. We survived them. There is a difference." Do Yun's eyes moved across the arguing generals. "And we only survived because of sacrifice. Many, many sacrifices." A loud crash silenced the room. Empress Naya had slammed her hand against the arm of her throne. Every head turned toward her. "Enough," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. "Your arguing helps no one." The generals bowed their heads in shame. The room fell quiet. Naya stood slowly. She seemed to grow taller as she rose, her presence filling every corner of the great hall. This was the empress that the galaxy respected. This was the ruler who had rebuilt an empire from ashes. "I have listened to your plans," she said. "I have heard your strategies and your fears, and I have heard one truth repeated again and again. We cannot win this alone." She began to walk down from her throne. Her steps were measured and deliberate. 30 years ago, this empire faced the same enemy. We sent calls for help to every corner of the galaxy. Our allies turned their backs. Our friends found excuses. We were alone, and we were dying. She stopped in the center of the room, surrounded by her advisors and generals. But we were not alone. Someone answered. Someone came. The room was silent. Some of the older Velari knew what she was talking about. The younger ones looked confused. Naya continued walking. She was moving toward the back of the room now, toward the corner where Do Yun stood in shadow. A species that we considered lesser, a people that we ignored and dismissed. They sent 50,000 of their children to die for us. They held our gates while we ran. They gave everything, and when it was over, we thanked them by erasing their names from history. She stopped directly in front of Do Yun. The room gasped. Nobles and generals stared in confusion. Why was the Empress standing before a simple human guard? "Captain Kang Do Yun," Naya said, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "Commander of the 3rd Human Fleet, the last survivor of the Palace Guard Unit, the man who carried my daughter through fire and promised to protect her forever." Do Yun met her eyes, but said nothing. Naya's voice trembled slightly. 30 years ago, you saved my life. You saved my daughter's life. You saved my empire. and I have never properly thanked you." Then, to the shock of everyone present, Empress Naya, ruler of the Valari Empire, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, lowered herself to her knees before the human soldier. The room exploded in whispers. Some nobles cried out in protest. A general stepped forward as if to stop her. "Your Majesty!" he shouted. "You cannot kneel before a human. This is—" "Silence!" Naya's command froze him in place. She did not take her eyes off Do-Yun. "This man has earned more respect than everyone in this room combined. If anyone has a problem with my gratitude, they may leave." No one left. Naya bowed her head. "Captain Do-Yun, I am not asking you as an empress. I am asking you as a mother whose daughter you saved, as a woman whose life you protected. Will you help us once more?" Do-Yun looked down at the kneeling empress. His face showed no pride, no satisfaction, only a deep, ancient sadness. "I never stopped trying to help, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "That was my promise." Naya looked up at him with tears in her violet eyes. Then she turned her head toward Yira. "Daughter, come here." Yira walked forward on legs that felt like water. Every eye in the room followed her. She stopped beside her mother and looked at Do-Yun, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. "Kneel before him," Naya commanded. Yira did not hesitate. She lowered herself to her knees beside her mother. Her head dropped in respect. "I am sorry," Yira said, her voice breaking, "for what I said, for what I thought, for everything." Do-Yun reached down and gently touched her shoulder. "Rise, princess. Your apology was accepted before you gave it." But Yira did not rise, and neither did her mother. One by one, the other Valari in the room began to kneel. First High Commander Torek, tears streaming down his scarred face. Then the older generals who remembered the war. Then the younger officers who did not understand but followed their leaders. Then the nobles, the servants, everyone. Within minutes, the entire throne room was kneeling before a single human. Do-Yun stood alone in a sea of bowed heads. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "My soldiers," he said quietly. "You should be kneeling to them, not to me. I am just the one who did not die." "Then let us honor them through you," Naya said from her knees. "Tell us how to survive this. Tell us how to win." Do-Yun was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I cannot defeat the Drakari with the forces you have. No strategy, no tactic, no amount of courage will be enough." He paused. "But I know someone who can help." "Who?" "Humanity." Do-Yun's eyes became hard with purpose. "Send a message to Earth. Tell them the Valari need help again. Tell them that the Drakari have returned." A general spoke up nervously. "But will they come? After what we did? After we erased their sacrifice?" Do-Yun turned to face the general. A small smile crossed his face. "You do not understand humans. We do not help people because they deserve it. We help because they need it." He looked back at Naya. "Send the message, they will come." Naya rose to her feet. Her voice carried across the room with new strength. "Send the message. Tell Earth that Captain Kang Do-Yun calls for aid." She looked at Do-Yun. "And tell them that this time we will not forget." Do-Yun nodded slowly. "And this time," he said softly, "we will finish it." The sky above the Valari homeworld burned with fire and light. Drakari ships filled the darkness like a swarm of hungry insects. Their black hulls blocked out the stars. Their weapons turned beautiful cities into ruins. But this time the Valari were not alone. The human fleet appeared at the edge of the system like a storm breaking over the horizon. This was not the desperate collection of small ships that had come 30 years ago. This was an armada, 300 capital ships, 1,000 fighters, and at the center of the formation, the flagship of the Human Defense Force, the UES Remember Valari. The humans had not forgotten. On the ground, Do-Yun stood at the palace gates. the same gates he had defended 30 years before. His body was older now, his hair more gray than black. But he wore his old uniform, the uniform of a captain in the Third Fleet, and in his hands was a weapon that had not been fired in 3 decades. Beside him stood Yira. The princess had refused to leave. Her mother had ordered her to evacuate with the other nobles. Yira had looked her mother in the eye and said, "I will not run while he stands. If the palace falls, I fall with it." Naya had not argued further. Perhaps she understood. Now Yira wore combat armor borrowed from the palace guard. It was too big for her, but she held her weapon steady. Her violet eyes were fixed on the horizon, where Drakari ground forces were advancing like a wave of death. "You should not be here," Do-Yun said quietly. "You said that before. I am still here." "This will be nothing like the training simulations. Real battle is chaos and fear and blood." Yira looked at him. 30 years ago, you stood alone because everyone else was dead or running. Today, you will not be alone. I promise." Do-Yun studied her face for a moment. Then he smiled. A real smile, the first genuine one Yira had ever seen on him. "You have changed, princess." "I had a good teacher." The first Drakari wave hit the defensive line like a hammer. The fighting was brutal and terrible. The alien creatures were fast and strong, with claws that could cut through metal and teeth that could crush bone. They did not feel fear. They did not retreat. They only advanced. Do-Yun moved through the battle like water. Every shot found its target. Every step was precise. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. He was a soldier, and this was what soldiers did. But he was not young anymore. His reactions were slower. His aim was not as perfect. Twice, Yira had to pull him out of the path of an attack. 3 times, she shot enemies that he did not see coming. "Stay close," he shouted over the noise. "I am not going anywhere," she shouted back. The second wave was worse than the first. Valari soldiers fell around them. The defensive line was breaking. Do-Yun could see the palace gates starting to crack under Drakari assault. Then the ground shook. Everyone, Valari and Drakari alike, looked up at the sky. A human dropship was descending through the fire. Then another, then a dozen, then 100. Human soldiers poured out of the ships before they even touched the ground. They hit the Drakari line like a fist of iron. They did not scream or shout. They simply fought with the cold efficiency of warriors who had trained for exactly this moment. "Third Fleet, 2nd Division, reporting for duty," a voice called out over the communication system. "Captain Do-Yun, we are here to relieve you." Do-Yun looked up at the dropships with tears in his eyes. "Third Fleet? But the Third Fleet was destroyed." "Rebuilt, sir, in your honor." The voice paused. "Every ship in the new Third Fleet carries the name of a soldier who died at Valari. We have not forgotten them. We will never forget them." The battle turned. Humans and Valari fought side by side as true allies. Where one faltered, the other supported. Where one fell, the other carried them to safety. The Drakari had never faced anything like this before. 2 species that actually trusted each other completely. In space, the human armada tore through the Drakari fleet. Ships that had terrorized 100 worlds were destroyed in minutes. The monster that had haunted Valari nightmares for 30 years was being beaten back for the first time in galactic history. But victory came at a cost. Do-Yun saw the Drakari commander a moment before it struck. The creature was larger than the others, faster, stronger, smarter. It was heading directly for Yira. There was no time to shout a warning. There was no time to think. Do-Yun threw himself between Yira and the attack. The Drakari blade cut through his armor like paper. He felt the cold metal enter his chest. He felt his legs give way beneath him. He felt the world start to grow dark around the edges. But he also felt Yira's weapon firing over his shoulder. He felt the Drakari fall. He felt her arms catching him before he hit the ground. "No!" Yira screamed. "Medic! Someone help! Help!" Do-Yun looked up at her face. Her silver skin was covered in dirt and blood. Her violet eyes were filled with tears. She looked nothing like the arrogant princess who had mocked him in that hallway. She looked like a warrior. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "You grew up strong." "Stop talking. Save your strength. The medics are coming. Tell your mother. Tell her I am sorry I could not stay longer. You are not going anywhere. You made a promise. Remember? You do not break promises." Do-Yun tried to smile, but darkness was filling his vision. He could hear shouting around him. He could feel hands pressing against his wound, but everything seemed very far away. "Yira," he managed to say. "What?" "Thank you. For the drawing." Then there was only darkness. The battle ended 3 hours later. The Drakari were destroyed completely. Every ship, every soldier, the swarm that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was gone. Humanity and Valari had won, but Yira did not celebrate. She sat beside a hospital bed in the Palace Medical Center, holding Do-Yun's hand. The doctors had worked for hours to save him. They said he would live, but he would carry scars forever. Yira did not care about scars. She only cared that he was breathing. Days passed, then weeks. Do-Yun slowly recovered. He was too stubborn to die, the doctors joked. Too many promises left to keep. On the day he finally walked again, Empress Naya called a gathering in the central plaza of the capital city. Every Valari who could attend came. Millions watched through broadcasts. Naya stood on a platform beside a massive structure covered in white cloth. Do-Yun stood beside her, supported by Yira. "Today," Naya announced to her people, "we reveal a truth that should never have been hidden. 30 years ago, 50,000 humans died to save our empire. Their names were erased from our history. Their sacrifice was forgotten. That changes now." She pulled the cloth away. Behind it was a monument of silver stone stretching high into the sky, and carved into every surface, in letters that would last for eternity, were names. 50,000 names, every human who had died for the Valari people. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, they began to applaud. The applause grew until it was thunder, until it was a roar that shook the buildings. Yira led Do-Yun to the base of the monument. He reached out and touched a name carved near the bottom. "Sergeant Park Jin-ho," he whispered. "He was my best friend. He died holding the east gate so I could reach your mother." He touched another name. "Private Lee Subin. She was 19 years old. She carried a wounded Valari child for 2 miles before she fell." His hand moved across the names, pausing at each one. He remembered every face, every voice, every promise they had made to each other. Yira placed her hand on his shoulder. "They are not forgotten anymore." Do-Yun nodded slowly. "No, they are not." He turned to face her. The old soldier and the young princess who had once mocked him. So much had changed. "I spent my life thinking humans were beneath us," Yira said quietly. "I was the one who was small." Do-Yun shook his head. "You were a child who believed what she was taught. Now you know the truth. What you do with it, that is who you truly are." Yira looked at the monument, then back at him. "I want to train with the human soldiers. I want to learn to be like them, not above them, among them." Do-Yun smiled. "Then you have already become someone worth saving." The sun set over the Valari capital. The monument glowed in the fading light. And somewhere in the distance, human and Valari soldiers trained together, side by side, no longer strangers, no longer lesser or greater. Just people. Keeping promises to each other, the way it always should have been.